Just making sure everything is up and running. Hello, my dearest peace lovers and peacemakers. I'm Sarah Jamshidi with Matin Rokhsafat. Welcome to Peace Mindedly, a podcast show featuring peaceful bridge makers. Our guests that we are so honored to have on Peace Mindedly are the people who are connecting cultures, bridging people and languages, and oftentimes trying to explain this connectedness. And we are absolutely thrilled and so honored to have our guests in Peace Mindedly. So you know the deal. We are live streaming our show on many social media channels and also on many podcast channels. Extremely easy to find us. Just type Peace Mindedly podcast and there you go. We are there just in front of your eyes. Today's is the first Tuesday of March, and we are live streaming our show in Seattle. It's noon Pacific Standard Time. One of our guests, Professor Fatima Sadeghi, is joining us from Germany, and Professor Aili Mari Tripp is joining us from DC. So Germany is around 9 p.m. and DC is around 3 p.m. And we are absolutely thrilled to have them. Before inviting them on the screen to join the conversation, I would like to just explain perhaps latitude of this program and what we have you for this show and for this episode. So today we are focusing on women and women issues, very specifically International Women's Day. So International Women's Day is just around the corner on March 8th. Many countries around the world celebrate women's rights, women's issues, and Women's Day. And for the sake of this show, we are going to focus on one particular region. It's called Maghreb. Maghreb includes, I believe, 5 countries. We are going to focus on 3 of the major countries: Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. And for that, we have 2 beautiful scholars. Before spending time explaining all of those, I really very quickly would like to explain what is International Women's Day and why we celebrate it, why we celebrate International Women's Day. So this day is dedicated to celebrate women's achievement across the globe, and then it's a day to bond with sisters who are fighting against gender inequality and gender parity. Gender parity is a statistical measure, compares men and women in different areas. Areas include economy, income, include work hours, and include education. And then by studying and comparing these areas, scientists oftentimes learn about the society's progress or regress of on women's issues and women movement. And also gender parity helps lawmakers and politicians to perhaps draft law according to the need. And we are going to discuss that, whether or not that serves women within their respected countries or not serve women within their respected countries. And then International Women's Day, in this day we draw attention to 2 women who are celebrating women's achievement. And for that, I do have 2 amazing guests. Professor Aili Mari Tripp, I'm bringing her to the screen. Hello, Aili.
Hi.
Hello, excellent. Yes, is Wangari Maathai Professor of Political Science, Gender and Women's Studies. She is also the chair of Department of Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Tripp just published her latest book. So I do have the book with me, and my audience always asks, so please show the book. So this is the book, Seeking Legitimacy: Why Arab Autocracies Adopt Women's Rights. She has received numerous awards and honors for the body of her work. Very welcome, Aili. Very good to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. May I ask you, please, when you speak a bit louder so then we have a clearer voice. Awesome. And I do have with me joining us Fatima Sadiqi. Yes, Fatima Sadiqi, she is a professor of linguistic and gender studies at the University of Fez in Morocco, also co-founder of the International Institute for Languages and Cultures. Sadiqi was selected by UNESCO as one of the 70 best worldwide public speakers on Middle East and North Africa women's issues. She has written many books, including Moroccan Feminist Discourse. Very welcome, Fatima.
Thank you. Very happy to
Excellent.
be here. Thank you.
Excellent. It's an honor. It's absolutely an
Yeah.
honor. Okay, so I am super curious and I would love to know what happened, why you decided to focus on Maghreb and to focus on women issues and women's rights within the Maghreb region. So I wonder who would like to go first?
Well, I could start.
Absolutely. Yes, go ahead, Aili.
I think my path was a little different than Fatima's, but I grew up in Tanzania. I lived there 15 years, and my mother was an anthropologist. So I often went with her to do research, and it was among a local Muslim Saramo society. She was studying rituals and symbols, and so I went to many different on weekends, going to initiation ceremonies and divinations and weddings and so on. And these were some of the poorest women in the world, but they led a very rich, symbolic, and ritual life. And so I learned to appreciate things that many people overlooked because they only saw people as poor, but not as people with humanity that we had a lot to learn from. This Zaramo people that we lived among, they cared about the old. They cared about each other. When you greeted somebody, you acknowledged their existence. When somebody was sick, everybody participated in their healing through rituals because they saw healing as a social problem, not just a physical individual one. And so women played a central role in these healing ceremonies. Anyway, what got me interested eventually was how knowledge is created, but it also gave me a real deep understanding and a lasting interest in how diverse cultures, appreciation for the diversity of culture. So to make a long story perhaps a little shorter, I continued then to do research when I eventually went to university and continued to do research on women's movements and women in politics in Africa, but primarily sub-Saharan Africa. So in Uganda, in Angola, in Liberia, and eventually I wanted to also incorporate North Africa, partly because I had seen that in sub-Saharan Africa, many of the Muslim majority countries were some of the earliest to promote women as political leaders. Tanganyika was one of them, had the main leaders of the independence movement were, again, Muslim women from the coastal area, Bibi Titi among them. Today, some of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa that have the highest rate of women in parliament, one of them is Senegal with 44%.
So basically, everything happened way before you conducted the research. Started when you were with your mom in the region and just got interested into just studying is basically what's happening. It was a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing. Fatima, I wonder what is your story? So what happened that you got interested in women's rights and studying women's rights and women's movement in Morocco and Maghreb?
Well, a mixture of a lot of things. Most importantly, I think, is the fact that I grew up in a Muslim Berber family. I have a rural background, and at school, as a girl, I learned that to be modern, I had to learn and master French, and to be a good Muslim, I needed Arabic. So I became a linguist because I wanted to find a place for Berber in my linguistic word, Berber Amazigh. My generation uses Berber, but my students now use Amazigh. We call ourselves Amazigh, but I have no problem with like using the two. And well, at school we didn't know anything about, we didn't learn anything about Berber, so I became very much uh, interested in finding out about Berber. And one of the things I found out is that, just to join what Ailey was saying, there is the link between Morocco and sub-Saharan Africa is Berber. Now that's one part. One may be related in a very complex way is the fact that I'm a woman. So as a girl, I felt the difference, of course. I mean, I am the first woman to go to school in my family. And I realized how difficult it is. So I internalized all that. And later on, when I got more experience and more knowledge, I tried to link the two in my life, like Berber and women. And that's how I became more interested and about North Africa. And most of what I learned were not things I learned at school.
Uh-huh. The things that you didn't
Yeah,
learn at school. So for the sake of
I had to talk, to talk to women, my own family. I had to find out, sorry to interrupt you, to find out these things myself. And that's what made my life exciting, at least for me.
tell me,
Yeah.
so you had to fight your way to explain things within your family. What do you mean?
That is, why is it that I grew up thinking that I belong, very proud of my ancestry, my grandfather, and all that. And then suddenly I learned that I had to hide that for a long time, because it's only recently that Berber became an official language. But what people don't know is the long struggle before. So for me, like the struggle for women's rights and struggle for Berber rights, they go hand in hand, because language
Excellent.
is very important, and Berber was marginalized just like women. And we had the new family law and Berber an official language almost synchronically. So
Excellent. So we
the two things, yeah, are very clear in my mind, that there is this relationship that I'm very much interested in
awesome.
as a feminist linguist. Yeah.
Awesome. So, feminist linguists, we are going to come back to this idea of so how words and meaning of words and interpretation of words really influence policy making and lawmaking within social political spectrum. We are going to come back to that. But Aili, I am interested. So, in your opinion, what do we gain? What do we gain of paying a specific attention to women, to women's rights, and to women's movements? So, why this can be an important issue for us? You think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can all, especially looking at things comparatively and looking at things, looking at some of these issues across countries, we can really learn how other countries have and other parts of the world have dealt with similar issues, and how they've, what kind of tactics and strategies they've used to improve the status of women, and so it's there's a lot to be learned from each other. And I think that's why I do comparative work. I don't focus always so much on one country, but I try to look at patterns across countries to see why some countries have done better than other countries in terms of advancing women's rights.
Excellent. So, for the sake of controlling the sound and the sound quality, from your side, there is, because our equipment here is a bit sensitive, and from your side, there is just probably the scratch of papers or something that we can hear it on our end. Okay. So, yeah, I just wanted to mention that because we are recording, be mindful about that. You mentioned something important. So, we are comparing, in your book you are comparing is what's happening in Algeria and Tunisia and Morocco. What are the similarities between these distinct nations in terms of women's rights?
Well, one of the first things that struck me was that they were passing legislation more or less in sync at the same time. around quotas for women in parliament. They were passing legislation around citizenship rights, the ability for women to pass their citizenship to their children or to their husband. In the past, it was only men that could do that. They were passing legislation around violence against women. And what was interesting was that these things were happening almost at the same, not the same time, but a few years apart. And they were learning a lot from each other and borrowing from each other. And so a lot of this had to do with the fact that the women's movement, they were organizations of women, Collective Égalité Maghreb, that were working together and were coordinating and had a blueprint for the region. And so this is why, it wasn't just only the women's movement, but their impact on their governments that allowed for many of these similarities in timing of the legislation being passed.
Many of the similarities allowing this legislation to pass. So I know, Fatima, that you are from Morocco, and you know the country really well, and also had comparative studies within the Maghreb about what's going on in the region. So I wonder, and also you know about the larger Middle East. I wonder, is there similarities between what's going on in Maghreb and probably the Middle East and women's movement in the Middle East?
First of all, just to follow up with what Aili said, women not only did that brilliantly, what Aili said, that they coordinated their efforts, but also they knew that their governments could not survive without their movement because of the history of North Africa, of the region, which is, and here I address your question, rather different from the Middle East. That's another thing that I learned when doing research on Berber, is that the Berber is actually what differentiates North Africa from the Middle East. That's the main difference, and that's the only link with the Mediterranean, and the only remaining link with the Mediterranean and with sub-Saharan Africa, which we don't find in the Middle East. Now, the main difference, so there are differences. First of all, in terms of women's rights, the Maghreb is at the forefront, but we should be very careful here. I mean, there is what I mean when I say women are at the forefront in terms of law, what's written on paper. Women are very heterogeneous. They are not homogeneous. There are differences of class, of education, of skills, of social status, etc. We are divided by many social categories. But as a group, if you look at us as a group, I think that North African women are at the forefront of women in the larger Middle East and North Africa, and that's one big difference between the two regions. In addition to history, because even if you look at the Islam of North Africa, it's different from the Islam of the Middle East.
Absolutely,
again, because it had to adapt to the Berber tribal system.
Adapt. This is the main point. Adapt.
And then because the Berbers were the indigenous populations, so they had to adapt to it. And the Berbers were the ones to spread Islam, and they're still the ones to continue doing that. But they give it this flavor which is indigenous and which can only be different from the Middle East.
Here is the question: why adaptation? Why do Arab leaders in the Maghreb need to adapt women's rights within their sphere, whatever sphere that they are working? Aili, this is the basis of your book. So why do they need to adapt to women's rights, you think?
Maybe before Aili answers, if you don't mind.
Yes.
And I don't want to forget this. For me, the way I see it, Aili is a social, she's like
social scientist.
So adapt, because Berbers, I forgot to mention that they are united by language. but they are different. They are separated by religion before Islam. There are different tribal ways of worshipping God and goddesses and so on. So Islam had to adapt to that. It's just I wanted to make that clear. That
Islam needed to adapt to the
to
Berber way of living.
To the Berber way of worshipping.
Berber way of worshipping.
So the goddesses disappeared, God and goddesses, but they did not really disappear. They went into our unconscious. They're still living there. So that's why women are important in Berber cultures, and they are very poorly known. But I mean, leave women apart outside in the public sphere. Islam had to because when Arabs reached North Africa, they didn't bring their wives, so they had to marry indigenous wives. Okay, we agree with that. So I mean, and the women are the ones who carry religion. So religion continued with Islam, but Islam had to adapt. You see what I mean?
And interesting.
Fight the tribes for political reasons.
And now we are talking about adaptation of Arab autocracies to women's rights.
This is history. This is history. Which we don't know, but which helps us understand the situation now.
So we are going to go back to Berber and the power of word and power of language, but we are talking about adaptation, Aili, and I would like to know. So what happened, and in one sphere we are talking about how Islam adapts itself against this new culture, and now we are talking about how Arab leaders need to adapt to women's rights. So why do we need this kind of flow?
About it as eloquently as Fatima did, but I think that one of the things that I was looking at was more from a sociological perspective or political science perspective, and looking at some of the differences that have emerged as a result of these adaptations that took place in the Maghreb, and how they're very different than some of what's evolved in the Middle East, even though there's similarities in religion and in language and in they all had colonial histories and so on. So there's many similarities between the two regions, the Maghreb and the Middle East, but also many important differences. And one of the areas where there are differences have to do with some of the laws that have been adopted in the Maghreb countries. So, for example, even though there are still important limitations in family law in both regions, one sees big differences between the regions in family law, for example. So in the only countries in the Middle East and North Africa that have limited polygyny are Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria. And Tunisia already in 1956, but it's restricted in Morocco and Algeria. Algeria and Tunisia allow women to pass their citizenship, like I said, to their husbands and children. In Morocco, they can pass the citizenship to their children. Women can travel outside of the country in these three countries, but in the rest of the region, in the Middle East, they have to get permission from their husbands, with the exception of Lebanon and now Saudi Arabia. The same thing. The abortion laws are more lenient in these three countries. Although Tunisia is the only one that allows for abortions without restriction.
Tunisia allows abortion without restriction. That's amazing.
They got it the same year that we did in the U.S.
Oh my God.
Maghreb countries, they also have very extensive legislation comprehensive legislation around violence against women. And again, these are the only countries that have that. So it's a big difference when you move into politics and look at overall the leadership. United Arab Emirates has now 50% women in the parliament, but overall, if you look at the numbers of women, like in Tunisia, 49% of the local councils have women. If you look at the cabinet, if you look at the parliament, overall, the Maghreb countries have done better, and they came into this earlier than the Middle East countries. So it's a big difference, and so one can't just lump this whole region, everything together. And I think a lot of it has to do. I mean, I think the Berber factor is one element of why we've seen this difference. I've looked at more contemporary reasons for why, how they evolved then and how they manifested later on.
One thing that really struck me when I was reading the book was the fact that there was influence of colonial power in the region, French colonial power, and the fact that I was just trying to find the exact page. I wish I had it handy, but just recently, the French passed the law so then women can have property right, and that really influenced as much as I understood. So I was wondering what was the French influence in the region and how really helped or not helped in terms of women's movement in the region.
Mm-hmm.
Ivy, go ahead.
Okay. Well, in terms of not helping, one of the things that the French did, and Fatima knows this better than I do, but they had different laws for the Berbers, for the Arabs, for the French. And so the legal system made it almost impossible to reform family law. So one of the first things that all three countries did almost, around the same time after independence was to create a unified legal system and a unified laws. And this laid the basis then for later on allowing for changes in the personal status code, much more extensive changes than you would find in the Middle East countries. It wasn't the only reason why we saw these changes, but it was an important one. In terms of other factors, I think that Fatima can speak better to. The feminist movement was influenced very much. Many people traveled to France and were influenced by the French feminists and French socialists. That had some impact. But also one could maybe talk about there's an extensive migration between this region and Europe and France in particular, and maybe there were influences in that regard as well. But I will defer to Fatima.
Yes, so Fatima, would you think that French colonialism helped or hurt?
I think no. I think the French colonizers colonized. Let me say, the French colonized Morocco through language, through education. When they when French became obligatory in primary education, the first year I went to school was French Arabic. So that was the way that the French used to colonize, through education, through language. That's one thing. The other thing is that it's true that for the first generation of Moroccan educated men and women, the French socialist intelligentsia was like a role model, because they put a lot of pressure on their governments so that their governments gives independence to the countries of the Maghreb. That's something, I am not saying that colonization is never a good thing, but I'm trying to understand why is it that the first Moroccan intelligentsia was really influenced by the French socialist academics and writers and artists and so on, because they were they put pressure on de Gaulle at that time, Charles de Gaulle, to grant independence to Moroccans. So far as women are concerned, the French language, because it is stripped from its database, is stripped from religion, unlike Arabic. So French was easier for women to say taboo words in French, to express sexuality in French. That's why many writers, the first writers, Bernice is one of them, they used French. And when she was asked on television, why do you write in French? I mean, French colonized your country and you are not French. She said, well, I didn't go to French. French came to me. And another intellectual, I think he was from Algeria, he said, I think it's Katib Yassin, they asked him, why is it that you write in French and all your writings are against colonization? He said, I write in French so that the French know that I am not French. That's
Interesting.
exactly what he said.
So oftentimes when I get so angry, I try to speak in English and not in Farsi, because in English I can control my anger compared to
Husband
Farsi.
and wives do
It
that
just
all the time.
comes out. Okay, so I'm just gonna ask this question, and we go to mid program. It's an example that plays into the power of words and why words are important in probably in politics and social platform. So I'm going to give you a very specific example. Back in Tehran, I was working for Zan newspaper. Zan in Farsi means woman. And then the head of the newspaper, for the first time ever in the Middle East region, was a woman. That woman, Faize Hashemi Rafsanjani. Faize was the daughter of the late former reformist president. She was also the parliament representative. It was this big argument, and she was women advocate, she was women activist, and she was just doing so much in the arena of moving women's rights forward by drafting laws, by putting forward lots of activism and so forth. And Zan newspaper was one of those. So I was working with Faiza very closely. Going to parliament, covering all of those stories about women and so forth. So it was this big argument in the parliament at the time. We are talking about 1997, 98, 99. That, especially 97, they were just, women were trying to figure out whether or not Iran's political hierarchy allowed them to nominate themselves for presidency. And they were arguing over one particular word, one word. That one particular word was rajul. Rajul in Arabic means man, and rajal means men. So they were arguing, probably many women, they were arguing that, so when we have rajul in constitution, it means human. Doesn't mean man. So therefore, women can nominate themselves for presidency. It's not only in males' domain. And men were saying that, no, this is Arabic, this is from Quran, and this is, it relates to men, and only men can be president. So it was a big discussion. I want to, by just playing out this example, I just want to know, in your opinion, how much words and language really plays out in terms of giving meaning or challenging some of the status quo within this women's movements that we are talking about in Maghreb. Fatima, I go with you first, and then with Aili.
Well, words are like human beings, and they don't have the same status. Some words travel from culture to culture with no problem, like television, for example, télévision in French. Every Moroccan knows what it is. Every Moroccan knows what television means, what radio means, etc. So some words travel, no problem with that. But some words have a lot of semantic baggage in them. And one of them is gender. Gender, this word, I mean, like human beings, I mean, it's stopped at the frontier, and it's searched, and sometimes it's accepted, sometimes it's not. The same thing with feminism. I think that words are very important, because now we are struggling with what to call feminism in Arabic. Until now, we don't have we say nasawiya, niswaniya, jinsaniya. Jins, it has some sexuality there, so people, they don't like it. So that's why French helped a lot there. So when you use Arabic, because it's the language of the Quran, the language of the religion, it's not easy to express. Now, the rajul that you struggled with, but there is another word in Arabic which is insan, that's person. It's
Mhm.
both man and women. So the insan is both men and women. So there's some very good words in Arabic that really serve our purposes, but some of them, gender is a linguistic term. It started with grammarians, masculine and feminine gender. But when it became associated with women's rights and gender and so on, it became a problem. It's a complex word. And until now, I mean, it's no ijtimai. People don't know what to call it. And when you use gender, then it's like you are copying the West in general, I know, the mainstream West. So we have a problem with these words. So words, they carry concepts in them. They are the window of a much bigger thing behind. And that concept, there's history in it, there's religion in it, there is belief, there is yourself. We relate to words in very complicated and complex ways. That's why um, I remember when we wanted to reform the family law, the time that was spent on just choosing the right word took much better, longer than actually the ijtihad, looking at the text and trying to find different meanings. Because how to package it, that's the problem. And even the king, when he presented the family law, the way he packaged it, I am not going to make something that's Islamic illicit or make something that illicit or something that is, he used the proper language. And everybody agreed on that. Whereas a socialist before him, during the first socialist government, he was very blunt and he went into gender, feminism, and so on without talking about religion. It was refused. Actually, it instigated, started a big row debate between the Islamists and the secularists. So, especially at this age, after the so called Arab Spring, every word means something, every word. You cannot imagine, even when I speak now, I have been writing on Berber for a long time, but even today, I mean, people would stop me and say, no, 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 don't use that word. And they would go into giving you like 10 or 20 arguments why. So you see, so
Exactly.
words are important in a multilingual setting like the Maghreb.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
And we are talking about the power of words. Aili, what was your experience?
Well, actually, I would like to draw some parallels with the US because it's an issue here too. We've had long debates in the feminist movement around using terms that some say, oh, you can just use the word congressman or fireman. But again, there's a certain weight that comes with that, and an association that only men can be in politics or only men can take certain kinds of jobs like being a firefighter. And so there's been a gradual acceptance of the term firefighter instead of fireman, congress woman and congressman here. But it comes from the same issue that Fatima was talking about, that that these words have power and they have meaning and they have associations, and those associations create realities and create gendered, for example, gendered professions. So changing the language makes people more conscious of the inequalities and the divisions of labor and the exclusions that women face.
Absolutely. You just gave an example in the US that how we are, trying to deepen a meaning or deepen a meaning with words. I wonder if in your research, did you come across any phrase or words that you thought has been debated for a long time in the Maghreb, Aili?
I think that Fatima is the linguist here, and I think she has better examples than on that. This is her area.
Yeah, well, spontaneously, the word North Africa.
Mhm.
Until now. Yeah, it's because in the US, I think it's Northern Africa, which which maybe is they use. I had this experience when I was writing Women Right in Africa. We didn't know whether we should call it North Africa or Northern Africa, and we were Maghrebi, but also US scholars working together. And North Africa. And when I go to the US, and the one thing I always ask, why aren't there enough North African studies in the US? That's why a book like Ailey's makes me personally very happy, knowing that people out there are writing about North Africa. Val Mugaddam, also from Iran, she is interested in it. And Munira Sharra, these women, for me, I mean, it's not because Ailey is here, it's just personal. I say to myself, it's like I'm discovering Berber this nice, fantastic enchantment. So people are talking about North Africa at long last, because in a very recent experience, I don't want to say what it is. I had this long discussion with a very established American scholar about why is it she didn't want to have North Africa there. It's just the Middle East, and yeah, and I don't know. So it's this word which
Mhm.
I wish I can live enough to see North African studies have more dignity in academia in
Inshallah.
US.
We
Yes,
say inshallah.
US Academy. I know that, yeah, they're prospering in Europe, but in because maybe I write in English, I would love to see the word being having it, the dignity it merits, it deserves in the
Absolutely.
study. Because there are things there. A lot of people are interested, but we need some kind of movement that would have this, not a movement, but I am hopeful that maybe sometime we will have African studies, North African studies.
Aili.
There are lots of people who have done, there's a wealth of literature in the region itself about women in the region and the women's
Yeah,
movement and women. I mean, in politics, there's a lot written, but it's in the region and people don't know about it outside. And I'm just wondering, is it a language issue? Because is it partly because French and Arabic dominate and also Berber dominate so much
I,
the Maghreb? Is that why it's somehow cut off from?
it's because of this term of decolonization.
Mhm.
They want it to be in the native language and to
Mm,
stay. But then, I mean, for someone who wants to bridge between cultures like myself,
mm,
I
mm,
think it's good to translate. It's good to have all these languages, but
mm.
uh, it's from different points of view without, I mean, meaning any harm or anything. They just, but there's a lot of information in the books that are written in Arabic. You cannot imagine,
Yeah.
or French,
Mhm.
especially Arabic. I am looking now at Islamic feminism, and what's written in Arabic is really some fantastic.
Mhm.
But we need. I think that if there is, this is my own naive point of view, if there is recognition of these things as outside, I mean, things will move. I don't know. Maybe, maybe, but we need. I agree with you, Ailey. I mean, there's a lot of things we need to make visible. There's
Mhm.
no visibility about what,
Ladies,
and a lot of young people. What are they writing? What they write about these things? So yeah, let's
excellent.
keep our fingers crossed.
Yes, exactly. So speaking of words and terms, my Martin, my editor, just mentioned to me that it's adopt and adapt. So I just messed those words. Wanted to mention that it was adopt, not adapt. So please stay
Okay.
tuned with me. So you are watching Two Peace Mindedly, a podcast show featuring peaceful bridge makers. And it's this show is we are live streaming our show on many social media channels, very easy to find on many podcast channels, very easy to find. And also if you do miss a podcast, podcast, please visit Goltune, Goltune, Goltune.com. It's a website, a peace journalism website that I run with a talented group of editors and correspondents to cover peace journalism. When you go to Goldtone, make sure to sign up for our newsletter. We send out weekly newsletters about our show and about what's happening within our peace journalism hubs, if you will. And then also please feel free to submit your questions and comments. We are here to feature them and present them to our guests. So coming up next Tuesday, we are talking to Medina Tenur Whiteman, author of The Invisible Muslim: Journeys Through Whiteness and Islam. Medina's memoir and autobiography about her experience growing up white and Muslim in Europe is also according to Publishers Weekly, is a very honest account that is gaining momentum within the readers who are interested in learning about converting to Islam, and also what it really means to be a Muslim from a non Middle Eastern or non-Arab or non-Turkish background. So I think it's, I'm reading the book and quite enjoying it. For the following Tuesday, we will discuss terror, hope, and resilience. Terror and Hope, The Science of Resilience, with filmmaker Ron Burke and scientist Rana Dajani. The movie follows scientists and humanitarians as they combine research know-how and established care methods to heal Syrian refugee children traumatized by devastating stress of war. So Rana, Dr. Dajani is using a very advanced medical research to measure ways in which kids are responding to the stress against the war. And then throughout her study, she found that these kids are developing a method, so to speak. We are going to talk about method and what they do, but a method to be resilient and still stay happy even within in refugee camp and after too much loss in their lives. So we are going to learn a great deal about this study. And right after that, we are talking with Olga Mecking, author of Nixon: Embracing the Dutch Art of Doing Nothing. And don't you love that? The art of doing nothing. You know, this guilt-free of doing nothing and not taking yourself and anything too serious. I think we truly need in this pandemic, and it's what's going on outside. We do need to just, be a bit more relaxed and not take anything and everything too seriously. So I think we're going to have so much fun talking with Olga. Back to this hour, we're talking to Aili Mari Tripp, chair of the Department of Gender and Women's Studies and author of Seeking Legitimacy: Why Arab Autocracies Adopt Women's Rights, and Fatima Siddiqui, linguist and specialist in gender and women's studies and author of Moroccan Feminist Discourse. Okay, ladies, so I would like to know, in your opinion, what has been Islam's influence in the region, and how women really took that influence to interpret within their women's movement? I want to know the Islam influence in the region. So who would like to go first, I wonder?
I'll let Fatima go.
Okay,
Yeah.
Fatima, go ahead.
That's an easy question for me, because it so happened that together with students, I think 12 or 13 students, we conducted a big survey in the Fez region with the simple question, what does Islam mean to you? So we talked to non-literate women, so we had to ask them orally. We prepared questionnaires for educated ones. We interviewed some authors and so on. And the gist of that, if according to what we analyzed the questions, etc., the answers, and Islam means faith. for many women as a personal relationship with something, God, Allah. It means faith. For the biggest portion of women, it means culture. I am born Muslim. It's like the color of my skin. There's nothing I can do about it, whether I go to the mosque or not. If that's not the question, but if you say that I am not Muslim, I may take it as an insult. This is sort of summing it up. Or politics, you use Islam to get political power. So it means all these things. But one thing, I mean, surveys are what they are, but Islam, I mean, historically and today, it has a big influence on women, on society, on the feminist movement, on the feminist discourses. It's I don't think there has been a feminist who attacked Islam directly. So Islam is accepted. It's just the way you deal with it, whether you deal with it as there are women who take it as they don't practice, but it's a human right. It's religious freedom. I want to be Muslim, full stop. And there are people who want to separate between the two, but we are in a very comfortable position where the king is at the same time the highest political and religious power. So what I'm talking about is what happens at the level of society, not at the level of politics.
Excellent, excellent. Aili, why would you think that we should care about what's going on within the Maghreb region in terms of women's rights? Why should we care about? I mean, seeking legitimacy, why Arab autocracies adopt women's rights. So we are talking about that, but why should we care about what's going on with women's rights in the Maghreb?
I think that we should care about people all over the world, and I think that in because there's so many interesting things happening in this region. I think that it's and like we said before, it's been perhaps less exposed to the rest of the world, and so I think it's really important. But I think it's also important as Americans, because here, if you listen to the discussion about the Middle East and North Africa and Muslim countries, people just generalize. They throw everything into one big boat, and they talk about the Muslim world and the Arab world as though it's just one big entity. And there are huge differences. And so even in this issue of Islam, even here, you'll find that even though people, there aren't, when you look at for example, Arab barometer surveys and compare the regions, there aren't big differences in adherence to Islam and praying and going to mosque and so on, but between the Maghreb and Middle East. But you do see differences in the legal realm. So
what are the differences in legal realm?
Yeah, so for example, you have almost all of the constitutions in the Maghreb, in the Middle East, have the Islamic law as the basis of the law. And even though the law in the Maghreb countries is influenced by, in particular, Maliki law, a school of Islamic law, the constitution is the basis of the law, and in particular law that has to do with the family law and personal status code. So that's a big difference. The only other countries in outside of the Maghreb countries are Lebanon and Iraq, and those are the only two other countries that have the constitution as the basis of law. So it's a difference, and it has implications for how family law is modified and changed. It's much easier in these three countries.
So we are saying that constitutional law, if these countries are not based on the constitutional law, what are they based for their argument against women's rights?
It's not so much against women's rights, but it has to do with the way that they see, the polygamy, for example, or the right of inheritance and so on. It's much more restricted. I would say even the issue of inheritance is still an issue in the Maghreb, but it's becoming, at least it's being discussed, and it's being challenged, and women's organizations are taking it up now in a way that you don't see in other parts of the Middle East.
So I just want to make sure that because I am just listening and learning and reading, just wanted to make sure that I understood. So when we are saying, you were saying that these countries, these Maghreb countries, some of them, their laws are based on constitutional law. And some of them are not based on constitutional law. So if they are not based on constitutional law, what are they based of? Like Islamic or religious?
Yeah,
Or
various interpretations of various, Sharia law, but
Sharia
various
law.
interpretations of it. It does influence the constitution in these other countries as well, and in particular the Maliki school. But what I'm saying is that it's not the basis the way it is in the most of the Middle East countries, and so it has implications for the ability to change laws. It's much harder to change laws that would affect women's personal status.
Excellent. So I would like to bring Fatima into our discussion, and I'm thinking, is what Aili is saying true? Is this going to really make it difficult to change women's status if we are arguing about? Did I understood it? Did I understand correctly? So is it going to make it more difficult for women?
Well, I can speak for Morocco. Morocco, the family law is based on the constitution, on Maliki law, but also on the French, Napoleonic, whatever, the French law. And what was sidelined was the Berber law, okay, which created a problem during whatever the Berber, Dahir, etc. But the constitution, I think it's a mixture of the constitution and the law, because the law is how you interpret Sharia. That's what law is, and the family law is at the center of that. When you talk about Sharia, about ijtihad, interpretation, it means that you adopt some Sharia, but the last word is constitution. But it does not mean that the law does not exist. It's still there. This is what I think. But because we have been struggling with the law since independence.
So
We
I
want to
wonder.
change it.
I wonder. I wonder. So when the revolution was happening in Iran, it was just this big discussion about a women movement, the family changes in family law changes, and then everything all of a sudden started. I mean, the political hierarchy started talking about Sharia law. I mean, influencing and injecting Sharia law within the constitution, and just basically drafting a new constitution. So I wonder, in your opinion, why family law and women get the most attention when these changes happen?
Because that's the basis of the community first. Second, but because it's the most, let's say, it's the weakest, I would say, space in which you can make this confusion between Sharia and fiqh. Fiqh is Islamic jurisprudence. That's the place where you can really put the two there and leave them very confused there. But when you separate them, Sharia, what is Sharia? If you open a dictionary, Sharia means a path that leads you to water. That's what it means. It's just guidelines. But fiqh, the law is man-made. It's how men, especially men, interpreted Sharia. And now what women want, they want also their share of this interpretation. This is what they want. They say, because, I mean, if a woman was involved in the making of the law, we wouldn't have had polygamy, at least.
Exactly.
So it's a man's, the law, the fiqh is a man's patriarchal way of seeing the world, not in bad faith, but it's a traditional. It's very, but the problem is that we are still using it now. But society has changed. Women now are breadwinners. The authority of a man as Qiwama, that is having the authority, has changed. Women, the moment women started to have a salary, the whole thing crumbled. I mean, these things that the ancient fuqaha are saying. That's why this is what I like about Islamic feminism, which, but not everything in it, I mean, speaks to me. But I like the fact, and I would support the fact that it's high time women. I cannot do it because you need to be knowledgeable of that. But if women think they are apt to go into this and have this ijtihad interpret, why not? This is the domain which is still male dominated. And they think that's where our problems come from. But this is not the end of the story. I think we need a reform of Islam also.
We need what?
And I will make it even more complicated, a reform of Islam, a reform of the law, a reform of Arabic. Because Arabic is not a mother tongue. I'm talking about written Arabic. It's a language I love. I like it, but it's not a mother tongue. It's women in Morocco and the region love it. They pray in it. But who understands it? You have to be educated to understand. And to understand the language of the law, I
You
am
have to
educated.
know the Arabic.
Yeah. So we have, this is where work needs to be done.
So
Arabic, Islam. We cannot just ignore them. They are there. We have to work on them as a society and as politicians and as rulers.
Yes. So, I mean, I cannot stop listening to you because I'm learning tremendously. I want to know Ailey's take of why in any major changes, the family law and women get attacked so severely.
I think that it's very much like what Fatima said, that the family, and if you look at all the constitutions in the MENA region, say that the family, start out with the family is the basis of the law. So that it's a central institution. But it also symbolizes, I think that the family and women in particular, they stand in and they symbolize a lot of things. And they represent more than just women or women's rights. It's also stands in for attitudes towards modernity, towards people's understanding of progress. And so when we talk about women and women's rights, we're talking about a lot more than just women. And so that's why I think also that you find that what surprised me very often was that you would go to an event and you'd see almost as many men. Fatima, for example, has organized big, huge fora of all people from all different parts of the women's movement, feminist movement, all different, and brings them all together every year to talk about a certain topic. And you'll find, a large number of men there. She's educated. She was one of the pioneers in educating, working in gender and women's studies in Morocco. And I run everywhere I went in Morocco. I'd run into her students, and half of them were men, maybe even more. But it's not. And so the reason, and I asked myself, why so many men are interested? And I think it's because it has to do with more than just women, that it has to do with the society as a whole and its future and where it's going. And so, I mean, at least I think that's part of the explanation. But Fatima and I have debated this also, why that's the case.
Excellent. Excellent. So the book Seeking Legitimacy, Why Arab Autocracies Adopt Women's Rights is the new book. It's out. Professor Ailey Murray Tripp. I mean, when I read the book, I didn't finish the book because it's like a scholarly book written about the region, about women, and about feminism movement, what's happening in the Maghreb. So I cheated. So I read a few first pages, and then I read a few last pages to just get ready for the show. But I'm gonna read the book because I
I
enjoyed. I
read it
enjoyed.
twice.
Oh, nice! There you go.
I swear, I read it twice. Yeah,
Awesome.
I
Wait,
loved it.
for a week, yeah, I have to read at least 2 3 books. So, but I'm gonna go back and read the book. Please
Yes.
stay put with me for a second. So you are watching to Peace Mindedly, a podcast show featuring peaceful bridge makers. For this hour, we talked to Professor Aili Mari Tripp, professor of gender and women's studies and author of Seeking Legitimacy: Why Arab Autocracies Adopt Women's Rights, and Fatima Siddiqui, linguist and specialist in gender and women's studies with the focus on North Africa and larger Middle East. You know the deal for our show. At the end of every program, we ask our guests to share something meaningful about peace, kindness, and compassion. A statement, a childhood story, a story, prayer, whatever that they feel they would like to share. One of the reason, as I explained, I grew up in revolution and war, and I've seen many war scenes. So I truly believe that what we are going through with the pandemic, it's a war-like situation, and during the war, we need and we must have peace, and we need kindness. Therefore, we are projecting peace and kindness in our program. I would like to start with Fatima, and then I go with Aili about sharing something meaningful about peace. Yes, Fatima.
Something meaningful about peace. Peace, I think with this pandemic and as a follow-up of this very nice discussion that the three of us had today, I think that this is for me peace. I mean, when you speak to people across religion, across difference, across a lot of things, and you make yourself understood and you understand, for me that gives me a lot of personal peace. And personally, I find a lot of peace in researching these things. And in the pandemic, I have read more books than before. So I hope, this makes some sense.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fatima. Aili. Yes, Aili.
Yeah, I would just leave you with a question. Why is it? And I've done research in throughout Africa and different parts, like I said, in North Africa. And one of the things that I've discovered is that women have this tremendous capacity to work across differences, ethnic, religious, racial, different class differences, and I've seen this, all over. And you've seen it in Libya and Yemen, in Syria, but also Liberia, Uganda, and Angola. And so my question is, why women? Why do women have this capacity? It's not everywhere, but we see it's often enough that it's worth asking the question. So thank you.
Absolutely. So, Fatima, Martin is asking, so could you please name, she has always interested in these areas. Please name some of the Islamic feminist books that you suggest we read. Do you know any title in your mind?
In English or?
Yes, in English.
In English.
Or the feminists themselves, like authors.
Islamic feminists.
About North Africa or Islamic, like contemporary?
Yes, contemporary. I mean, you were saying that they're doing really great work.
Yeah, I like Munira Sharrat.
Okay.
She was the first one to really explain what happened, why the family law, why the state. She made the relationship between women's rights, the state, and the tribes. I think Munira Sharad, she teaches at Texas University. I think she's good. And now you have Aili also, you have her book. Who else? Val Mugaddam also. I like her work.
Val? Okay.
Val, she's Iranian, American Iranian.
Oh, I see, right.
مغتا, yes.
But she wouldn't call herself an Islamic feminist. She's
about Islamic feminism.
Yeah.
About Islamic feminism. So sorry, I forgot that about Islamic feminism. Oh, Asma Lamrabat.
Right.
It's good.
Sorry?
She writes in French. Asma Lamrabat. Sorry, I skipped the Islamic. I thought.
So if you could just email, I mean, I sent an email, so then you reply, so we can put it in our program. I'm sure that Matin's question probably might be other people's question about interested to know who are the Islamist feminists.
We can post that later.
You are
Val.
really
Yes.
Ziba Mir Husseini.
Yes.
Excellent.
That was okay.
Sure.
But I will
Thank you
focus
so
on
much.
North Africans because they are not known.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Well, they should be.
So I do again seeking legitimacy. Why Arab autocracies need autocracies adopt women's rights. Aili Mari Trip. It's been an honor to have you, and also Fatima Sadiqi. Thank you very much. I enjoyed the discussion and it was very rich. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Good night. Goodbye. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.